So do you get the idea? Caddis are a little important? You bet they are. You got to be able to fish caddis hatches effectively, whether you're in Maine on the Rapid River or chasing landlocked salmon anywhere across the northern states, big brook trout, whether you're on the upper Connecticut River, where I got some really nice fish on caddis and mayflies were unimportant. Spring creeks, caddis popping all day long on the spring creeks. Even if all you ever catch, little brook trout, caddis are a very, very special thing. And today, we're going to talk about the Paraschuck caddis. My name's Bob Lindquist, and what I'm going to do is show you today all about a parachute caddis and how to tie that. Now, I always love looking at a good fisherman's fly box because the patterns that I see in there are going to be the patterns that I'm going to want to use when I go fishing. You'll notice here that I have a whole bunch of flies called Iris Caddis. They're great flies. They're super, super, super flies. But I also have all of these guys. These are a couple of more Iris Caddis for an October pattern that we have up here. Picnicite Gudifur, I think is its name. And then you look along here, and this is my stash, if you will, my collection of Parachute Caddis. I love them for a lot of reasons. I'll talk more about that as I tie the pattern and the good things that it has going for it. So let's kick back. Let's learn how to tie this fly the way I do it. I'm sure others do it differently and they do it really well, but I got some tricks that work for me. Okay, the Paraschuck Caddis is an awful lot like the Paraschuck Mayfly or a Comparadun or a Sparkledun or an Invisidun or any of the types of dry flies that are made more as a style than as a particular pattern per se. So I really like to tie this in a tan color, which I'm going to do now. I tie it tiny and black for some little tiny black summer caddis we have around here. I tie plenty of them in insect green, a combination of tan and green, some dark olive ones even. A whole bunch of different color patterns that mimic the colors that I see in the caddis around here, a little yellow and so on and so forth. So the first thing I need to do is tie in the shuck, and when you tie in the shuck, one of the things I see some people do is they will roll the shuck onto either side of the hook shank rather than keep it flat on the hook shank. Really simple trick that'll get you to lay it flat on the hook shank is to just take the shuck, pull it tight, not too tight, just taut is a better word, not real tight, and rest your hand on your fly tying vise, and that centers the shuck on the hook shank. And now I will stop where my thread goes over the barb of the hook. When the thread goes over the barb of the hook, most hooks, not all, and yours could be different, so check it out, the hook shank tends to bend after the barb. So if you're at the barb, the very beginning of the barb, your shuck should come off perfectly straight. And most of the time, we want a straight shuck. Some patterns, like an Irish Caddis, you bend the shuck onto the hook, but for this one, we keep it straight. All right, and speaking of hooks, the hook I'm using here is a Gamakatsu. I think it's an S12 or an S10. It's an excellent, excellent hook. Highly recommended. The Tiemco hooks are good too. Personally, I'm not big on the mustad hooks. I've seen too many of them break, but I love this Gamakatsu hook, and some of the Tiemco hooks are good as well. Okay, so now we're going to form the body on this particular fly, and when we tie the body on this fly, I like a body, according to LaFontaine's book Caddis Flies, that has traps air bubbles, that has a very translucent effect to it, and it looks like the shuck on the actual body of the insect. And I remember one of the first times upstate on the Beaverkill River, God, I must have been about 18, 19 years old. It was one of the first times I saw a full-blown hatch. And when I saw this full-blown hatch, I was absolutely dumbfounded by the number of shucks that I saw in the water. And since then, I've watched enough bugs emerge that you can actually see the shuck as part of the fly. Some of it, in time, falls off the back of the emerging insect. And some of it actually the insect is crawling up out of, depending on which stage the insect's at, how far along in its emergence. So I like to spin a dubbing loop, which I'm doing right now, and I like my dubbing to be loose. I include Antron in my dubbing all the time for its reflective qualities, and I never use just one material when I make a dubbing that will be for the body of a dry fly. I always include some very smooth textured dubbing that dubs tight to the shank, like beaver it would be my favorite. And then I also use something spiky. And there's a whole lot of sources of spiky dubbing. There's a hare's mask, there's could snowshoe rabbit in an instance. You just feel around and find some spiky dubbing. Squirrel is another good one. And I include some of that in there too. And as you look at this, I think you can see the way that this dubbing is going to reflect light and capture air bubbles. Okay, so I have that done. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know I like to tie the body from the forward to the back, as Paraschuck taught me to do, and then tie it forward again. And you should be able to see a bit of a spiky effect coming in, but just in case you don't see too much of a spiky effect coming in, not a problem. Let me just tie this off. There we go. When I tie it off, you'll notice I always like to go forward a little bit and then reverse it and go backwards a little bit, and there we are. Okay, so there is my my body formed, and I have it locked in by bending it back. Now, as far as making it spiky goes, I then take a little bit of a dubbing teaser and spike it up just a little bit more if it's not enough already. So that's the first thing I do. And the body of the fly is complete, the shuck of the fly is complete, rear half done. More like the rear 2/3. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tie in a parachute post. And when I tie in the post, I've done it where I use a wing of deer hair or a rabbit's foot, and then as I tie it in, I bend it back up again and I wrap the post off there. And I've done it with several different things. And Antron, polypropylene, Zelon, any of those things tend to work a whole lot better, I think. I think they're easier to work with. And they catch plenty of fish, so as far as I'm concerned, that's what I'm going with here, because it makes my life easy. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm actually working the Zelon until I get to a point in the hook shank, and I'm there now, where I'm comfortable with where it's at. I don't want to quite, I want to be just a little bit before where I would begin to tie off the eye of the hook. And now, as I wrap this parachute post, I just catch the thread with my middle finger. Here's my middle finger. As I come around, I catch the thread with the middle finger, transfer it to my other hand, and the bobbin has slipped a little bit on that. Sorry about that, but not a problem. Show you that these things don't even bother the process. Okay, again, catching it, wrapping it around. I also use my ring finger to catch the other side of it. See, here's my coming across there, boom. Wrapping it around, forming my post, come back down the post after going up. And I already know that I'm not quite as high as I'm going to want to be on this post, so I'll come back again. But before I do that, just on the chance that this all unspins, I want to wrap once or twice around the shank, which I'm doing right now. And then back around the post, and now I'm going to come back up again. The vise I use is called a J-vise. It's a fantastic vise. If you ever have some disposable money and you want to get what I think is about the best vise money can buy, Jay Smits in South Africa builds this vise out of his garage. It is a fantastic vise. And one of the things it could do, and I'm not going to be able to show this to you because then I'd have to reset the tripod positioning, is I can turn this upside down and I can actually rotate, you can start seeing it here, to a fully vertical position. And when I rotate to that fully vertical position, that allows me to wrap the parachute post as if it was horizontal to the ground, much like a hook shank would be horizontal to the ground, which makes for a much more natural movement or natural tying. Now, one of the things you got to learn over the course of time about a parachute post is how high up do I want to go? And as you're looking at this, you're probably saying to yourself, man, that looks a little bit high. And I kind of agree with you, except I'm going to want to whip finish at the very tip of this. So that's why I left the extra there. All right. Now the next thing I'm going to do is put a little super glue on the base of this post to really make it firm. And some people like to do this after they tie in the hackle, and 98% of the time it's just as good, maybe even a little bit better. But every once in a while your super glue will get overloaded with super glue that starts to harden. And in the course of getting it out the nozzle, it'll plop out. And if it plops out in a rush, you have a problem. And now your wonderful, beautiful hackle feather is going to be wrecked. Okay? Now, speaking of wonderful and beautiful hackle feathers, this is actually my second try that I'm doing right now, because the first one, I left this in that position to block it, so I'm afraid that it's going to ruin the video, so I'm tying another one. And I just found my feather. I often misplace it. Maybe you do that too. Okay. So you'll notice that I leave this a little bit long. And I'm not going to tie it in by the tip down here. I'm going to tie it in at around the midpoint. Now, the people who like to put the super glue in after they put the feather along the post do so because they feel that the super glue helps lock the feather in. And that's a great point. However, my experience is that, especially when I'm cranking and not talking to a video camera, I can get the feather on there and tie it onto the post in plenty of time before this ends. Okay, so as you're looking, now you can see the base of the stem right here, and the super glue on the shank was still a little bit wet. So I'm just going to bend this back a little and tie it right down there. And this now has 3 right angle turns in it. This stem is not going anywhere. So this feather's not pulling out. Simple as that. Alright, so I have the rear 2/3, maybe or so 3/4 of the body, who knows, 2/3, I don't know, whatever. And I have my post on, I have my hackle in. The next thing I need to do is to put my deer hair wing in there. And in the course of doing the deer hair wing, don't use regular full long deer hair. Find a source of some shorter deer hair. By shorter I mean this. This is as fully long as you can find. Now you can find some of this on the hocks, you can find it on younger deer. Perhaps mule deer has it. I get mine from Blue Ribbon Flies. They have excellent sources for compare done size, and if it's compare done size, it's Paraschuck size. So this is a great deer hair stacker. Again, done by Jay Smiths, the same guy who makes the vise. I'll show you why in just a second. Most deer hair stackers handle big clumps of deer hair like you would use for muddler minnow. This does not. This is designed for small clumps of deer hair. So I can pull it out right at the base there. And now I need to put the wing on. And my experience is, or my thought process, and I don't know that I'm any righter than anybody else, is that I like a slightly short wing. In my hopes and my thinking, a shorter wing indicates a freshly emerging wing, and the fish is more likely to go for it because it's less likely to fly away. That could be complete trash, but I think my hope is that that's the case. All right, I take 2 light turns over it, and now I start cranking down. I always want to pull. You see here how I'm pulling? I'm pulling straight down. I do not rotate and pull. No rotating and pulling. That's torque. Torque needs to be very carefully controlled when you tie. If you wrap this deer hair and twist with force as you wrap, and torque is circular force, if you do that, you're going to pull the wing over and it's not going to sit straight on the body. Now if you look here, that wing sits nice and straight on the body. That's what you're looking for. Alright, you don't need no wing on one side and too much wing on the other side. You want the same, equally distributed on both sides. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is put a little tiny shot of super glue, because I want to make this fly as close to indestructible as I can. I'm going to put that little shot of super glue right up along the base there. Try not to put too much there. And it can also end up helping, perhaps, I don't know if it does, but sometimes I think it does, the body turning around the hook shank, which sometimes happens to everybody. So, alright, now I got to put some dubbing on the head area, and we're almost done with this guy. Okay. There's a couple of things to watch for when you put the head on here. First, I am going to dub this a little bit tighter. It doesn't need to trap an air bubble as much as the body does. And I want to make sure I cover the entire base. There's nothing more annoying than thinking you did a wonderful, beautiful fly, and then you get done and you look, and there's this big dark brown spot on the bottom. So I am making sure right now that I have hit all of these areas and that I don't leave a gap of dark brown there. Nope, I'm good. There it is, you can see it right there. This fly is going to be fished in faster water and riffles, and I don't mind if it's a little bit chunky compared to a corresponding mayfly. Wrapping this around 5 times, could be anywhere from 4 to 6, I'll go 5. There's once, notice I weave, or I try very hard to go under those hackle fibers. Again, over the wing, under the hackle fibers. I go through twice, and now I'm kind of lifting and weaving, trying to make sure I don't trap any fibers here. Now that little area I left of thread on the post gives me a nice firm foundation on which to whip finish. And there, folks. So how can you tell when you've tied a good one? Well, what I look for personally is I want the wing slightly longer than the body. Right about here is good. I've got my shuck coming out. I don't look for the shuck to be on one side or the other. I don't know if the fish care. I just like it this way. You'll notice that I have the hackle. It comes around. This fly skates beautifully. I never would have thought it would, but it does. You want to make sure that your whole base is covered here. That in here you got it picked out a little bit. Look, I can pick out in here too, just a little bit. Don't overdo it. And the last thing I'm going to do, just to, again, in that spirit of making as indestructible a fly as possible, is to take a little bit of super glue, and I just hit the head of this post right here, top of the post, and I let that super glue drip down into the parachute post, locking everything in. I don't want to put a big blob there, because if I put a big blob, I might have a bit of a problem. Now, here's one that I tied just a few minutes ago. I'll hold it up next to it for comparison, and they look pretty much the same. And that's what you're looking for your flies. You want your flies to come out looking more or less the same each time. The hackle on the one in the vise looks a little bit shorter, but it is the same hackle. It's just that the post was a little thicker on the first one that I did. Alright, excellent pattern, super, super, super fly, the Paraschuck Caddis. Strongly recommend you go out and fish it as much as you possibly can. Learn how to tie it.